Welcome to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode: Roots of the UFO Phenomenon. The origins of modern UFO and UAP sightings are deeply rooted in Washington state, with the Yakima region serving as a significant historical backdrop that helped set the stage for the famous Roswell crash. I actually visited Yakima on a road trip with a friend, and it truly feels like a strange frontier. At one point, the highway runs directly through a U.S. military training ground. The moment we crossed into that military property, the ambient vibration drastically changed. I suddenly started hearing a high-pitched ringing frequency in my ears, and the sound didn't stop until we drove completely out of the zone. It didn't give me the exact extraterrestrial vibe that Roswell does, but the heavy, strange energy felt remarkably similar. Years later, I drove back out there with a family from Sammamish to stargaze. As I looked out into the distant sky, I saw something completely unexpected. It didn't look like a mechanical UFO or a standard UAP. Instead, it looked like a vibrant, fiery orange dragon waving and floating through the sky for close to 10 seconds. The strangeness of the area didn't stop there. On another occasion, I met up with a consciousness exploration group, and we stayed at a place situated right between Yakima and Mount Adams. During that trip, one of the members in our group witnessed something in the sky that they absolutely could not explain as anything other than a genuine UAP. Mount Adams, which I mentioned at the end of my story, is actually world famous in the UFO community, especially near the Asidi Ranch, for producing the exact kind of vibrant, unexplained light anomalies and UAP sightings my group experienced. Most of people think of origin of UFO probably lies Roswell, New Mexico because of famous Roswell UFO crash. But why it triggered was Manhattan Project starting in 1943, and the Trinity Site, then Trinity Site, go back to Yakima because of industrial-scale plutonium production. Shadows over the valley. Yakima, wartime military infrastructure. The agricultural and desert expanse of Yakima, Washington, occupies a surprisingly pivotal position in the early history of American aviation anomalies, military mobilization, and the nuclear age. While modern maps associate the region with the expansive Yakima Training Center, a vital U.S. Army facility established during World War II, the convergence of wartime defense preparations, secret atomic research nearby, and historic close encounters ties Yakima directly into the bedrock of modern UAP lore. World War II and the Yakima Firing Center. As the United States mobilized following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Northwest was designated a high-priority strategic zone due to its vulnerability to Pacific threats and its vast, isolated terrain. Establishment of the base. In 1941 and 1942, the U.S. Army secured vast acreage in central Washington to establish what would become the Yakima Firing Center, now the Yakima Training Center. It served as an artillery range, training ground, and tactical staging area for troops deploying to the Pacific Theater. Wartime skies and security. Given the proximity of Yakima to the secretive Hanford Site, constructed starting in 1943, just to the southeast as part of the Manhattan Project to produce weapons-grade plutonium, the airspace over central Washington was heavily monitored by military intelligence, anti-air batteries, and civilian ground observer corps. 2. The Yakima connection to Kenneth Arnold's 1947 sighting. Yakima's most famous claim to ufological history is inextricably linked to the birth of the modern flying saucer era, serving as the literal destination of Kenneth Arnold's historic flight on June 24, 1947. The flight path: Arnold, a businessman and experienced private pilot, took off from Chehalis, Washington, bound for Yakima. While airborne near Mount Rainier and Mount Adams, he witnessed a chain of 9 blindingly bright crescent-shaped objects weaving between the peaks at supersonic speeds. Landing in Yakima, shaken by the encounter, Arnold landed his plane at the Yakima airport, where he first reported the incident to the airport's general manager. It was to reporters and officials in Yakima and Pendleton that Arnold described the objects moving like a saucer skipping across water, instantly giving birth to global terminology. The atomic triangle, Hanford, Yakima, and the military. The timing and geography of Yakima place it squarely inside the strategic military corridor of the Pacific Northwest. Operating alongside the secretive Hanford plutonium production works, which supplied material for the atomic age, Central Washington experienced intense federal oversight and military surveillance. Throughout the mid-1940s, military personnel stationed at regional installations logged numerous unexplained aerial incursions. Because atomic projects like Hanford represented the absolute apex of classified wartime technology, any anomalous objects hovering near these corridors were treated with extreme national security concern, laying the groundwork for decades of mutual fascination between UAP activity and strategic defense infrastructure. The Hanford Site and its relation to the Yakima region. While the Hanford Site is geographically located in southeastern Washington, primarily in Benton County, along the Columbia River near the Tri-Cities of Richland, Pasco, and Kennewick, it shares a profound historical connection with the Yakima Valley and the Yakima Nation. Geographic and logistical proximity. The Hanford Nuclear Reservation sits roughly 50 to 70 miles east-southeast of the city of Yakima, across the arid shrub steppe of the Columbia Basin. The river flows southeastward through the valley, eventually emptying into the Columbia River right at the edge of the Hanford Reach near Richland. During the Manhattan Project, starting in 1943, and throughout the Cold War, the vast workforce required to build and maintain the reactors travel from surrounding regional hubs, including Yakima, Ellensburg, and the Tri-Cities, transforming central Washington into a crucial economic and defense corridor. The land comprising the Hanford Site is part of the traditional ancestral homelands and ceded territories of local Native American tribes, most notably the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation, alongside the Wanapum, Nez Perce, and Umatilla. When the federal government secretly seized the 586-square-mile Hanford area for the Manhattan Project in 1943, local tribes were abruptly forced off their ancestral grounds, losing access to sacred sites, fishing grounds along the Columbia River, and traditional root-gathering areas. Why Hanford? The U.S. government's selection of the Hanford Site in 1943 was not based on local uranium mining. In fact, there were no uranium mines at or near the location. Instead, the site was chosen entirely for strict industrial, logistical, and safety requirements established by Manhattan Project engineers and the DuPont Company. Key factors in site selection. Abundant water supply. The most critical requirement was an enormous constant source of cold water to cool the massive nuclear reactors. The Columbia River provided the ideal flow rate and temperature for this purpose. Isolation and safety. Because of the catastrophic potential of a reactor accident or a chemical explosion during plutonium processing, the Army required a remote region. They specifically sought out a site with no towns of more than 1,000 people within a 20-mile radius of the hazardous zone. Electric power. The project demanded massive electrical capacity, which was readily accessible from the nearby Grand Coulee and Bonneville dams. Geology and terrain. The flat, arid, and stable desert terrain of the Columbia Basin provided a firm foundation for the heavy canyon buildings required for chemical separation, while remaining far enough inland to be secure from potential enemy attack. Existing infrastructure. Despite its isolation, the area featured enough baseline rail and road access for the Army to rapidly expand it into a massive wartime construction corridor. Where did the uranium come from? The raw uranium used at Hanford was mined elsewhere, primarily from the Belgian Congo, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Canada, and the United States, such as the Colorado Plateau, before being processed into fuel rods at external facilities and shipped to the site. At Hanford, natural uranium was placed inside graphite-moderated reactors and bombarded with neutrons to transmute a portion of it into plutonium. Once irradiated, these fuel slugs were moved to chemical separation plants on-site where the plutonium was extracted. Ultimately, choosing Hanford was a pure engineering decision based on logistics, water, power, and safety, completely independent of the land's local geology. While the site served its wartime purpose, its operations left a profound and lasting environmental footprint. For decades, tribal leaders, such as the late Yakima Nation environmental leader Russell Jim, fought tirelessly to hold the government accountable for radioactive and chemical contamination leaking from Hanford's underground storage tanks toward the Columbia River. Ensuring that tribal treaty rights and ecological preservation remained central to long-term cleanup efforts. Core operations of the Hanford Works. Established under General Leslie Groves and J. Robert Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project, Hanford was engineered for one primary purpose: industrial-scale plutonium production. The B reactor, built in record time and operational by September 1944. The B reactor was the world's first full-scale nuclear plutonium production reactor. Uranium fuel was irradiated in massive reactors along the river, chemically dissolved in processing canyons like the T plant and B plant, and separated to extract weapons-grade plutonium. Historical impact: the plutonium produced at Hanford fueled the Trinity test in New Mexico and the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki, Japan in August 1945. Cold War expansion. Production scaled up dramatically during the Cold War. By the time the final production reactor was shut down in 1987, Hanford had generated roughly 2/3 of the plutonium for the entire U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. The frantic pace of wartime production and decades of Cold War manufacturing resulted in massive environmental shortcuts. Billions of gallons of liquid radioactive and hazardous waste were pumped into aging single-shell underground storage tanks, many of which subsequently leaked into the ground. During the late 1940s and 1950s, deliberate and accidental releases of radioactive iodine-131 into the atmosphere exposed downwind populations across central and eastern Washington, including agricultural communities toward Yakima and Spokane, to invisible fallout, sparking decades of epidemiological studies and public health concerns. Today, Hanford hosts the largest environmental cleanup project in the Western Hemisphere, managed by the U.S. Department of Energy, focusing on stabilizing waste, treating millions of gallons of tank sludge via vitrification, and restoring the surrounding desert landscape. When examining modern UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, and high strangeness reports associated with Yakima, Washington, data from organizations like the National UFO Reporting Center, NUFORC, and regional researchers point to a few concrete realities. Statistical context: Washington State's high reporting rate. Statistically, Washington State consistently ranks near the top nationally for per capita UFO UAP reports. Analysts attribute this to a combination of factors. Geography and airspace. The state features heavy commercial flight paths, major military installations like Joint Base Lewis McChord and naval air stations, and restricted airspace corridors such as the Yakima Training Center. Topography: the dramatic mountain ranges, Cascades, Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, and desert valleys create unique atmospheric phenomena, such as lenticular clouds, which frequently generate misidentified civilian reports. The Yakima Training Center factor. A significant portion of modern local reports and anomalies clustered around Yakima involve its proximity to the Yakima Training Center, YTC, a massive 327,000-acre U.S. Army installation used for ground and air maneuvers. Because military aircraft, night vision operations, drone testing, and flare exercises are routinely conducted in restricted airspace over the arid shrub steppe, civilian observers near the borders of the base frequently log anomalous lights or silent craft that turn out to be classified or routine defense operations. The Mount Adams-Asidi Corridor. While Yakima itself acts as the urban and logistical hub of the valley, the corridor stretching westward toward Mount Adams and famously associated with areas like the Asidi, enlightened contact with extraterrestrial intelligence ranch is internationally recognized in modern ufology. Unlike industrial or military-linked sightings, modern reports from skywatchers gathered near Mount Adams heavily emphasize luminous orbs, multicolored hovering lights, and erratic trajectories that defy conventional aircraft behavior. Driving up Mount Adams as far as the car can take you reveals that the true mystery isn't just up in the sky. It feels anchored right there in the land beneath you. When you navigate those rugged backcountry roads ascending the mountain, the sheer isolation and towering presence of the terrain create an unmistakable atmosphere. It is easy to understand why so many who travel that corridor feel that the Earth itself holds an ancient magnetic energy, serving as a silent foundation for all the anomalous lights and high strangeness that linger above the valley. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact, The Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute hit of real-life experiences, perfect for your daily plunge into consciousness exploration. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.